stay up. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Pray up. On track, now we going way up.
Hello, everyone. We are back again on College Football Forecast, and we have the specialist of special guests, one of my favorite people on the planet Earth, not named Brock Vieira or my own family. And I grew up in ACC country, as I mentioned before. The first college sporting event I ever saw in my life was on the campus of University of North Carolina, where my father was a student at the time, a graduate student. And my father loved football. And part of who I am and how I am is because of my father's love of the game. And I remember bits and pieces, though I was very young at the time, and it was my birthday. And it was cheap. You know, my dad said, you know, we're broke. I'm a grad student. I'll take my kid to a football game for his birthday. And I got to see Don McCauley run wild on the NC State Wolfpack. And I still remember he became one of my first early favorite players. And my love of the game has gone forward since then. And so in celebration of the Atlantic Coast Conference and its amazing and sometimes, you know, sometimes twisted history, and we'll get a little bit into that. We are joined by Jeffrey Vann. And before we launch into peppering you with questions, Jeff, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in talking about the ACC.
Oh, well, I went to a couple of ACC schools, you know, for college. I went to Georgia Tech as an undergrad, and then I went to Clemson as a graduate student. So I had a lot of ties in that way. But even before that, I grew up on ACC basketball, like a lot of us. And you know, as I went to those schools, like I just watched it all the time, and I found myself like on message boards and commenting on the games and stuff. And then I thought, you know, I don't think the ACC has a voice out there really on ESPN. This was probably like 8 or 9, 10 years ago, and I was like, I think I can just, you know, be at least a voice on the internet talking about the ACC. And you know, they were getting a lot of bad publicity at the time because their football, they were coming off a disastrous BCS era. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to put my 2 cents in there. And that's kind of how it all started.
Yeah, I'm older, obviously, so I came in, you know, when I first started getting in fights about ACC sports, it was long before message boards or anything like that. And I had two cousins that played at Lafayette High with Lawrence Taylor, and then I followed his career after watching my cousins. Shout out to Tori and Tomas Johnson, a couple of my favorite cousins. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I was really going to watch my cousins. It was like, who's that guy? And so I watched his career from that point forward. And, you know, Carolina was a pretty good football program at the time. They, you know, they were Bill Crum and built a scrappy, you know, whatever. Scrappy is probably being a little dismissive, but they were like 8-9, 7-8-9 kind of win program. And they would get to a, you know, Peach Bowl-ish, you know, that level, like get to a bowl and hold their own. But no team in the ACC, except obviously Clemson, which in 1980 won the national championship, was seen as a threat to win a national championship. And of course, even with Danny Ford's Clemson Tigers, that sort of came out of nowhere. People thought he was nuts to go to Clemson. Now, obviously, I'm the person only remember when Danny Ford decided to take that job. People were like, you know, just hang out here a little while. You know, there's no way Bear Bryant can coach forever. You'll inherit the Alabama job. Why would you go to Clemson? Because people thought Clemson was literally thought it was a baseball school at the time, Jeffrey. That's what people thought of in those days. The days I'm talking about, it wasn't thought it was a basketball school. It wasn't thought it was a football school. It was thought it was a baseball school. They had a good baseball program, but a track. Baseball and track was actually the Clemson sort of calling card 50 to about, you know, until, like I said, Danny Ford got it rolling there in the late 1970s and early 1980s. But, well, let's go forward. So the ACC, oddly enough, has now found itself falling back into an area, I think, of somewhat disrespect. Take me through the conference as you see it, and in what particular games for this week after that you are really focusing on.
Yeah, I mean, and I think some of that disrespect kind of really came back. You know, I talked about that BCS era. I think they won like 2 BCS games during that time. But then, you know, Florida State got really good, won that national championship in 2013, and then Jameis Winston wins a Heisman. Louisville has a Heisman Trophy winner. Clemson becomes, one of the elite teams in college football with a couple national titles, and 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 then in 2016 was just a banner year for the ACC. I think they won 10 games against the SEC. Uh, Georgia Tech wins 9 games, beats Georgia at the end of the year. That was Louisville and Lamar Jackson being in the playoff chase the whole year, and we thought, that's going to be a foundational year for the ACC to really be and remain among the best in college football. And then, like you said, Bill, the last few years, some of that disrespect has come from, you know, the depth of the ACC not being very good once you get past Clemson. Clemson, Florida State declines, Louisville, falls off the map. Virginia Tech struggling and has struggled under the Fuente era. They replaced him. Jeff Collins just got fired at Georgia Tech. They're a complete mess now. But this year, you've seen the ACC have a rebound. Um, they currently have 5 ranked teams. We know what happened to Miami last week against Middle Tennessee, but overall, their ranked teams have done pretty well. Um, NC State got by East Carolina in that opening week, but they have a nice quality win over Texas Tech team that just beat Texas, and we know what happened with Texas when they played Alabama. They came within a missed field goal, of knocking off of Alabama, and then of course Florida State beating LSU. I mean, we know this is not like a 2019 LSU team, but still, that game was in New Orleans. This was not a Florida State team many expected a lot out of, and that was still that was still a high value win. We've seen Syracuse be one of the surprises, has a win over Purdue 4-0, and Wake Forest offensively as great as they've ever been the last few years. So there's a additional amount of depth we've seen from the ACC we hadn't seen in a while. And I don't want to forget about Pitt, who that opening weekend beat West Virginia and then took Tennessee to overtime and basically had players just getting injured left and right in that game and came within an eyelash of beating a really good Tennessee team. And they're likely going to be a 10-win type team. So there's a lot more quality depth in the ACC than we've seen in several years. And then that leads into this weekend with a couple of huge matchups. And I mean, how often has it happened in the last 5 years that the ACC has two ranked matchups uh, with playoff implications already? Going into October. We start with Wake Forest ranked going into Tallahassee to play Florida State. That's a huge game. I mean, Florida State wins that game, and in the month of September, they're going to have a win over LSU and a win over a good Wake Forest team with games against Florida and Clemson, NC State on the horizon, and that's a team where their offensive line has improved so much over the last few years. That was really, post Jimbo Fisher and at the end of the Jimbo Fisher era, where Florida State really declined. I mean, their whole talent base declined, but the offensive line was a complete disaster. And now you can see they can run the ball in a way they haven't been able to in a really long time. Jordan Travis has been fantastic at quarterback, um, really poised in the pocket, and he's mobile. And so it's a great matchup with Wake Forest because we know Sam Hartman. They lit up Clemson's defense last week. Defensively, they've got some issues at Wake Forest, but um, on the offensive side of the ball, that's going to be a big challenge for Florida State. And, in the winner of that game, definitely, clearly, Florida State, if they win that game, they're in the thick of the Atlantic uh, division race, and Wake Forest stays in. They avoid their second loss in the Atlantic and would be a threat the rest of the way. So huge game. That's at 3:30 um, on Saturday, and then the night game with Clemson and NC State. Game day is going to be there. It looks like the weather is going to hold out, so I don't think that's going to really be a factor. Maybe a little breezy, but you know, NC State knocked off Clemson last year, and in at NC State and Carter Finley. So I mean, they're really looking forward to take that next step. And you win in Death Valley after that Texas Tech win. They still have games with Florida State left on the season. Wake Forest, Syracuse. You're going to have to put them in the playoff chase. And if Clemson, they're trying to remain, the top dog in the ACC, got unseeded last week. They lose tomorrow, and you really have to wonder, is that error where they were the best of the best in the ACC, is that going to continue? I mean, they're going to stay being very good, but do they take a knock back? So that's a huge game um, for Clemson, NC State, just all kind of playoff implications, division implications, conference implications, and that's just not something we'd seen in the ACC for a while, with that many teams having that much on the line. So this weekend's a big weekend for the conference.
Yep. And I'm going to open up to Brock. I'm sure you have some questions. Then at the end, I'll have my final question. But go ahead, Brock.
Yeah, so one of the bigger hirings in the offseason was obviously Mario Cristobal to Miami, and I was one that was not for this move for the various reason of I believe he ruins quarterback to his run-based dominant offense. We've seen that kind of happen a little bit. Tyler Van Dyke hasn't performed up to standard. They did lose to A&M. They did lose to Middle Tennessee. Do you believe that this is growing pains to where Miami is going to become that great dominant program again, or do you agree with me that Cristobal was not the right man for the job?
I mean, I think you brought up some great points, Brock. I think it's too early to say he's not the right guy, but some of the things you brought up were the big concerns that people had about Cristobal, and they're kind of coming to fruition. People that looked at what Cristobal did with Hebert there at Oregon, where he kind of held him back and said, you have a guy like Justin Hebert, that talented. You should be able to get a lot more out of him. I mean, we see what he's doing in the pros now, and it's not by coincidence. Same thing is happening with Van Dyke. I mean, there's already talk about, if Van Dyke doesn't play, I mean, he could end up transferring. I heard that this week. It's already, being tossed around out there, and that is crazy because he's another quarterback that they thought had pro potential. But on the positive side, what he has done, he's brought in a great staff. They're really recruiting well. But clearly he's going to have to find a quarterback that's going to buy into his balanced, more run heavy offense. Because he's had two talented really quarterbacks, and he's getting the same criticism both times. So I don't think you can say he was the wrong hire just yet, but we've seen a couple of red flags here that make you wonder, is he going to adjust to the talent of his quarterbacks in the future? If Miami's going to become what we're used to seeing years past, he's going to have to start handling these quarterbacks better, because he's got the recruiting base. He's got NIL backing all over the place. He's put together a great staff, but he didn't want to turn into the Texas A&M version of Jimbo Fisher, where you just handcuff your offense, even though you have all kinds of advantages elsewhere on the program. So I think it might be too early to say he wasn't the right hire, but I think we're seeing a couple red flags here that he's going to have to change some things, or they will be saying he was the wrong hire here in the next year or two.
Absolutely. And I always love it when somebody brings up Jimbo Fisher, because he is my favorite coach to talk trash on. But that's a point for another time. Kind of moving up the coast a little bit to Virginia Tech. When I was growing up, I watched Virginia Tech football. They always had a phenomenal defense with the Bud Foster, and Frank Beamer always had his boys ready to play. That's a really good quarterbacks, Tyrod Taylor, so on and so forth. But in recent years, they've fallen off the map. What do you think they need to do to kind of reestablish themselves as a force in the ACC?
Well, the first thing that they had to do, they did do, and that was get rid of Justin Fuente, which unfortunately looked like a pretty good hire on paper. He ended up winning like 19 games his first 2 years, and we thought, oh, here comes Virginia Tech. They're on their way back to the days of Frank Beamer and stuff, and then it just the wheels came off, and he never could recover. and that program, he let the talent base really drop off. Um, but I do think that Brent Pry is the kind of coach that can bring Virginia Tech back. I mean, they have a great fan base there. They have tremendous support. They have a tradition there. I mean, they're one of the brands in the ACC, that's for sure. Um, but he's got to improve the talent base on that team. I mean, we saw some good things already defensively from Virginia Tech, but there's no talent on the offensive side of the ball. Um, Wells is he gets what he can out of his talent, and I think at times they don't look so bad, but I mean, there's just not a lot of talent on that entire offense. And if he can just get them to play like disciplined, hard-nosed football for the rest of the year, um, that's what they want to get out of Virginia Tech this year, because it's going to take a couple of years for him to get that talent base up. But I do think he's the kind of personality that gives Virginia Tech an identity. And I mean, he's a character. He's a high energy guy. It's just going to take some time for them to build up the talent. That's really where Virginia Tech's struggle right now is. They just don't have a lot of talent on that team.
Yeah, I'm a native of the Tidewater area, and when Virginia Tech was good, like really good, they were scooping up the best kids out of Hampton,
Yep.
Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Portsmouth, and Newport News particularly. I mean, they owned Newport News. All the best kids out of Hampton and Newport News almost always went to Virginia Tech. And that, I think, if we could talk about one thing that led to the downfall of the Fuente regime, is all those relationships with all the coaching broke down. All the the top high school coaches in the Hampton Roads area, either, I don't want to say they didn't like him, but he didn't seem to ingratiate himself. I'll put it that way. He didn't seem to go out of his way to build the relationships that, I mean, Frank Beamer, knew those guys and they knew him like well, I mean, Tommy Riemann sent every quarterback he had every time he had a good quarterback to Virginia Tech. I mean, going back to not Aaron Brooks, but he went to Virginia. But outside of Aaron Brooks, all the rest of them, including Tyrod, including Randall, including both Vic brothers, including who's the one I'm forgetting? There's another one he had that he went to, but all of them not named Aaron Brooks ended up at Virginia Tech. Do you think that Brent Pry can repair those broken relationships in the Tidewater area?
I think that he can, and that's where he comes in with that personality. I think he's a lot different personality than Fuente was. He's a personable guy, and I mean, it's going to take time though, because like you said, Bill, we were used to seeing Virginia Tech in the late 90s and mid 2000s. I mean, just have like incredible talent on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that was like linebackers. They had linebackers, defensive ends. They were so fast, so good on special teams with the Beamer ball. I think that Pry can repair those relationships, but it's going to take time. I mean, Fuente left him a mess, that's for sure.
Understood. Okay. Sorry, Brock. I just wanted to get that up before I forgot it. Go back to you.
What a tremendous collection of talent. Aaron Brooks, Marcus, and Michael Vick, Tyrod Tate. Like, you want to talk about quarterbacks that can ball and ball similarly, though they all have different little things to them, but they all have the same skill set. Now, high school defenses must have been not having a fun day in school, to say the least. But moving in state lines, going to Virginia, Tony Elliott was hired to replace Bronco Mendenhall, who retired. And that's a guy that gained a lot of criticism for how his handling of the DJ Uiagalelei and that offense at Clemson during his final year as offensive coordinator. How do you feel about that hiring, and do you think that he's the right guy to take Virginia to the next level?
I mean, he definitely has the pedigree of coaching at Clemson during its best years and coaching some fantastic players. And I mean, he's a tremendously smart individual. He's got an engineering degree. So the one thing that I wonder a little bit about Elliott, though, is that last year Virginia was so successful on the offensive side of the ball with Armstrong and the wide receivers they had. And I mean, he came in right away and said, "Hey, I want to go away from that. I want to be more balanced." And now they have an offense that's really struggling to move the ball. And Brennan Armstrong is kind of regressed so far. So I don't know if this is a case of Tony Elliott saying, "Hey, I'm just going to do it my way," or, if he's really using the talent that he has on his team. I mean, I know that they had a ton of turnover on their offensive line, and that's playing a factor into, um, but his desire to just institute his system so early, it is a little bit of a concern. It's still, it's too early to throw up and say, okay, he's not going to be successful because he's just started. I mean, they don't look awful, but when I kind of read and said he just going to completely move away from where you felt like the strengths of Virginia were, and now you see Armstrong kind of struggling. um, it makes you wonder a little bit. But I mean, I think ultimately, I think he's a good fit for Virginia. Um, I think he's been so successful. I think it was the right time for him to get a head coaching job. So, on paper, I think it was a pretty good hire. But I did wonder about that right away, how insistent he was to change the offense that was so successful last year.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've been talking about the newer head coaching hires. I want to go up to someone that has been there for a while, going up north to Syracuse. Now, University of Hawaii alumnus Dino Babers was once the most favorite man in Syracuse, and he was on the hottest of hot seats. Tommy DeVito goes down to Illinois. Now he has a new quarterback. Syracuse is balling; they're undefeated right now. What do you think contributed to that great turnaround?
I think it's difficult for Syracuse to recruit at a high level. So, um, Dino Babers and Syracuse, that they got to take advantage of those years where everything kind of comes together with an upper class type of group. And I think he's got a group like that this year that's really bought in. With Schrader, he's got a great running back. They're really opportunistic on defense, and they're winning without even necessarily always playing their best game. I mean, the guy can coach, that's for sure. They never really have looked like they were a poorly coached team. They just looked like they didn't have talent. But I think he's got an older team now, and they bought into what he's selling. I think on another podcast, Bill and I talked about how they look faster, and I think that's a part of it too. They're just playing well, and they're definitely going to be 5-0 after this weekend playing Wagner. And I mean, it's going to come to an end. If you look down the rest of the stretch of their games, I mean, it's just brutal. Um, but still, to take a team that many considered one of the two or three worst in the ACC, and he's very likely going to win 7, 8 games and get to a bowl game. I mean, that's a strong season for Syracuse. They've taken advantage of the early part of the season where they had some winnable games and won the toss-up games, especially early. Louisville, Purdue with the last second win. So yeah, they're really playing well. And during that second half of the season where I think they will lose some games. Um, they're also going to be a threat at home, especially when they play like a Notre Dame and those type of games to pull an upset. And I do expect them to at least win one or two of those, ranked matchups they have coming up.
Absolutely. So my last question is kind of looking a forecast for the future, and since the ACC kind of went through their run of dominance, obviously you had Florida State as the national championship champion team, Clemson went on a great run, so on and so forth. Within the next 4 to 6 years, especially with the expanded college football playoffs coming, what teams do you think are best set up to contend for national championships right now?
I mean, I think you still always have to put Clemson into the mix. We see the progression of DJ Uyunglele. They got Cade Kublik waiting in the wings. There's not any reason to think that Clemson won't remain a top 10, 15 team. So they're still gonna be a playoff threat. But I think now in the next 5 years, you got to look at the development of Florida State. They really look like this could be a foundational year, because once when they get it going, and it wasn't that long ago when they had that national title team of 2013 and through I think 2016, they won the Orange Bowl, beating Michigan. So they're not that far removed from being really good, and they have a strong season this year, and they put together a couple good recruiting classes. I mean, they very well could be in there. I'm still high in the long term on Miami and Cristobal, but like we talked about earlier, the handling of quarterbacks has got to improve. I think NC State is actually on pretty solid ground, and Pitt as well under Narduzzi and Doran, where I think in a given year they can get into the top 12 once that playoff expands and get into that chase. They're never going to quite recruit as well as the Clemsons and the Florida States can, but I mean, we're seeing it now where, those are pretty strong programs that, in a given year can get into that playoff chase. Other teams, I think, are maybe a bit too far away to really be in that picture. The North Carolinas and the Virginias, Louisville's, and I mean, I think you can even look at what Wake Forest can do, is that they have a chance to get into the top 12 from time to time. But I think those are probably the teams you want to look at over the next 5 years. Anyone else is going to take a while to get there.
Yeah, and my final question is the transfer portal. Obviously, the transfer portal giveth, and the transfer portal taketh away. Who do you think has done the best? And I guess since we have to have a little negativity, who do you think has maybe struggled to understand how best to make use of the transfer portal?
I think Norvell at Florida State has done a pretty good job with the portal. I mean, we saw, he got the Johnson kid from Georgia last year, becomes the ACC Defensive Player of the Year, and then they get the kid from upstate New York, Versailles, I think. I know it starts with a V. I'm totally mispronouncing. He got hurt in the last game, but he played so well against LSU in that game. So I think Florida State has done a really good job of like identifying players that can impact right away. And especially if they start winning, they're going to continue to utilize it. Norvell is definitely taking advantage of it. I think when you look at teams that could have utilized it better, that had the potential, I mean, you have to talk about Clemson. I mean, we saw what happened against Wake Forest this weekend. They had a couple injuries in the secondary at cornerback, and they had to start a couple inexperienced players, talented, but I mean, they absolutely were destroyed in the secondary, and it had to do with a lack of depth. I mean, 1 through 11, Clemson is right up there with anybody, but where the transfer portal can really help you is with that quality depth. And even though I know Dabo Swinney has said he's not against the portal and he'll use it where he needs it, I mean, if he were to really embrace it, kids would want to come to Clemson. That he could add quality depth, and I think he needs to go from just kind of tolerating it to really accepting it, because when you see other programs like Alabama embrace it, and Ohio State, I mean, that's who you're trying to keep up with. Clemson's not trying to, just win 10 games and contend in the ACC. They're playing for national titles, and and you see what Florida State's doing. I do think Clemson could take more advantage of the transfer portal.
Yeah, I once again heartily agree with your assessment there. And before you go, please, Jeffrey, tell everybody where they can find your work and follow you.
You can find me at Talking ACC Sports on Twitter, at allsportsdiscussion.com, where we blog on the ACC. We got a couple of writers on there that give their thoughts on the ACC. So, yeah, you can find me on Twitter there, just talking about the games this weekend and looking forward to it. It's a big weekend in ACC football.
Yeah, it'll be a huge weekend. Things could potentially turn in such a way that the ACC can end up with 3 teams in the top 15, depending on how it all plays out, which would be fascinating. Interesting to see if that happens. Once again, We will have to have you back a little later in the season, especially when we get closer to playoff time. Thank you once again for joining us. If you aren't following Jeffrey on Twitter and you like the ACC, forget love. If you love the ACC, following him. But if you even like the ACC, follow him. Talking No G, ACC Sports?
Sports. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I had it correct. Thank you once again, Jeffrey.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
Certainly. Thank you. And we'll have you back, I promise.
All right.
And
Sounds good.
here's this important message, people.
In 2006, we founded Yeti Coolers with a simple mission: build the cooler we use every day if it existed. One that was built for the serious outdoor enthusiasts rather than for mass discount retailers. One that could take the abuse we knew we'd put it through, out in the field and on the water. One that simply wouldn't break. We decided early on that production innovation would come from necessity and first-hand experience, not from market research and data analysis. Today, Yeti products perform when it matters most. Whether that be an excursion into the remote Alaskan wilderness, chasing redfish on the Gold Coast, or just getting together with friends in the backyard, we make gear that helps you stay out longer, travel.
This commercial is brought to you by TrueBrain. Say hello to TrueBrain. We're not magicians. We're not going to turn you into a rocket scientist, unless you're already a rocket scientist. We're not big pharma, and our products are custom made to boost mental output. We empower people to do their best thinking.
So, as much as I enjoyed having Jeffrey on, now the two of us get to be alone. No, Jeffrey's awesome, and he'll definitely be back. He's one of my favorite people.
That was a treat and an education on ACC football.
Oh, he's steeped in it. I love it because that's what I grew up on. You know, you are lucky, Brock. You grew up in an era when you could watch so many different games from all over the place. I grew up. I've been watching football for years by the time ESPN launched. I saw the first ESPN broadcast, like when they first launched it, and it looked like it was being broadcast from like the radiology lab of a veterans hospital. And ESPN has definitely upped its game since 1979. But let's get back to what we're going to talk about. So we're going to bring in a new segment we're going to call Chalk Talk. And in the Chalk Talk segment, we each get to put on, well, you've already got on a headset. I guess I'll be putting on an imaginary headset. But we're going to go through our approach to attacking, whether it be offense or defense, the teams involved in a particular matchup. So what is this week's game we're going to feature in the Chalk Talk?
Absolutely. So this week's game is going to be a phenomenal Big Ten matchup between the Michigan Wolverines and the Iowa Hawkeyes, a rematch of last year's Big Ten championship game. Of course, Michigan is 4-0 right now, beating up on 3 duds of a team and then sort of skinny by Maryland. Iowa didn't have a great start to the season. They won 7-6 against South Dakota State, and that 7 was not a touchdown. But they slowly kind of got the ball rolling. Obviously, they lost the Cy-Hawk Trophy, but they beat Nevada, and then also they just recently beat Rutgers. So we're gonna see a matchup of old school versus somewhat new school with old school tendencies in this game, and we're gonna see some interesting play calls to say the least. But we're gonna be putting on the helmets and saying what we think and what we hope should happen for both teams. So, Bill, do you want to kick it off with the defensive side?
Sure. So I love Bruce Lee, and who doesn't? And so Bruce Lee had a really great quote, and Kelvin Bell, who's the defensive line coach at Iowa, uses this quote or mentions this quote when they talk about their defense, which is remarkably simple. They make a few little adjustments, but they keep it very simple because, one, I mean, if you've played at all, you know that thinking is the opposite, is the enemy of speed. The more you're thinking, the slower you play. So one of my favorite Bruce Lee quotes is this one, and he used it talking about their defense. I fear not the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks. I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. And so they play a defense that hasn't changed much, frankly, since it was implemented by Norm Parker. The big difference, and we'll get into the difference from the old Norm Parker, Phil Parker, no relation defense. They don't make tremendous adjustments, though, going from playing a team that's power run to playing a team that's, 4 or 5 wide spread. They still do basically the same thing. So I'm going to tell you basically what's the same and what's changed. So in 2018, they got beaten fairly badly by Wisconsin. Well, not badly, but but the Hawkeyes had a 17-14 lead going into the end of the game, and they stayed in their same defense. Nick Neiman was covering AJ Taylor, the slot receiver of the Badgers, and there were two double post routes that were run to the right side of Iowa's defense, which led to a 17-yard touchdown strike from Alex Hornibrook, of all people, to Taylor with 57 seconds left. Speaking of schools that can't figure out the quarterback position, hello, Wisconsin. But and though they had a week, right? 1 week between that game and the game against Minnesota. So when I said beaten badly, it was a bad loss, is what I should have said. It's the kind of game that they tend to win, and they lost it. Their team is built on winning those 17-14 games instead of losing those games 21-17. And so what Phil Parker did, he made a change that he considered but sat on and never quite moved on. So he moved Amani Hooker from strong safety to what called the cash position, which is not new. It's been around for a very long time. You see the little dollar sign, but people call it the monster, rover. It's been called a bunch of different things throughout the history of the game. But I remember when at Maryland, a million years ago, they had a monster man, these called. That's like, I was a kid at the time. I was like, that's a cool name. It's like, I want to play that position, monster man. But essentially, it's a hybrid sort of combination weak side linebacker and strong safety. So you sometimes will flip with the strength of the formation. At times, you may drop into coverage. At times, you blitz a fair amount. You come down in the box and sometimes have to take on pulling guards, which means you even though you're probably about 205 to 220 pound body, you better be, fairly stout. Geno Stone also played that position. Jake Gervais has played that position for them. And Hooker, in his first year in that new role, was the Big Ten Defensive Back of the Year. They only had 2 interceptions in that year, the year they made the change, 2018. In the first 4 games, they had 18 interceptions in the final games of the season. So since they've become a 4-2-5 team, they've used it on about 3/4 of their snaps, roughly speaking. And so they were one of the last teams to sort of be just 4-3, no matter what. No matter, you could have, 5 wide, they were 4-3. So when they made this change, what happened is it still allowed the 4-3 rules, but say they're playing a team that's double tight ends a lot, like Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin do that a fair amount. They'll still base out of their 4-2-5, but what they'll do is essentially tell their this is now Justin Jacobs, that you're more of a linebacker today. Right, you're gonna be more like a linebacker today. So they'll simply move him slightly differently at the snap of the ball. Last year's guy in that position was, as I said, Dane Belton. Had a great year. He had 5 interceptions. Was a first-team All-Conference guy. Got drafted. Is playing a little bit already in the NFL, and so they're going to make some changes based on, some changes are going to be based on personnel the other team's playing, and obviously, based on just situations. A few other things that I would sort of throw out there, or just like in their old defense, they have to avoid blitzing. I mean, every team wants to get pressure without blitzing, but particularly them, because they put so much of – a lot of teams don't trust their guys to do certain things. And even though they play a fair amount of zone, they play sort of like Seattle, that quote-unquote matchup zone, right, where it's not a soft zone. It's an aggressive-ish zone. And once again, based on situation, they will become less aggressive. I mean, they play a lot of situational things, but the ideas of how they attack things on defense are built around the old rules that they had a million years, not a million, but 20-something years ago. They still let all of their linebackers, or pretty much all their linebackers, have a coverage responsibility. They don't have anybody who's just a pass rusher, except for their down linemen. So even with going to the whole cash situation, they still ask those guys to do a lot of the same things. Their down linemen, they're a one-gap defense most of the time. They will occasionally, as a change-up, ask guys to do once again something a little different from what they normally do, but they're very traditional. They're very normal. I don't know what term you want to use in the way they attack certain things. They don't make a lot of big time changes, I guess is the term. They make little adjustments. They make small adjustments as opposed to big adjustments to what the other team's doing. They generally do what they do. And then I guess the last thing I would say is you've got to be a smart person to play in there. And that's why certain teams love Iowa, guys that play for Iowa, because they don't make a lot of changes in personnel or changes in, we play our defense, right? But our defense is flexible enough that it can do a lot of different things. So we may ask you to play differently. You may actually be two gapping in, at least at times, if we're playing a certain team that likes to do certain things. But mostly we're going to be a 4-2-5 team that still plays a little like a 4-3-4 team. And we're going to sit in a 2 or 3 deep, occasionally quarter zone, but a matchup, an aggressive approach to it. We're not going to just let you sort of wander into an open area and let you catch the ball. No, when you get into my zone, I'm going to come and man you up, at least until you leave my area. So that's essentially how that defense is played.
Absolutely. So with that being said, I'm going to jump into the Michigan offensive coordinator's chair. I'm going to start with a quote as well. And it's from former Notre Dame quarterback and now OC Tommy Rees. And that's "do your F-wording job." Now that is very hypocritical of Tommy Rees, but that's beside the point. The issue for Michigan is that their offensive staff, they don't do their job. And for many times, their offense looks mundane when they really shouldn't be. So the first thing I want to do is identify the strengths and weaknesses of the Michigan offense. Now, your strengths are you have a quarterback that's almost as fast as Mike Vick. You have a really great running back, and you have a phenomenal tight end in Schoonmaker. You got some decent offensive weapons like Roman Wilson and so on and so forth. But for the most part, you're not going to be passing the ball over the field 24/7. They're very run-based offense. And what they like to do is like to establish the strong side, attack the strong side. And the reason why they do that is because that's a setup to attack the weak. You basically hammer the ball to the strong side repeatedly. Then you run a halfback counter to the weak side, but pulling guards and able to get numbers in space and then wide open yardage to the end zone. What they also like to do is they like to load up the box up to bring everyone in on that run, hit you with a play action or RPO. We did it last week against Maryland with Schoonmaker, where they just did this little kind of like hit or post to the end zone, just a little dump off touchdown. They did it against Hawaii a lot, hit them with the run, and then hit Roman Wilson deep when the safeties came up to defend the run. That's what they like to do. It works against bad teams, but when you have top defenses like they're good to face in the Big Ten, they're going to get exposed just like Maryland exposed them last week. So let's talk about what I would like to see from the offense. And I'm talking a lot of 11 personnel. Now, this is a formation they occasionally run already. Sometimes they like to bring in another tight end, go 21 personnel. Sometimes they might go, if you go 32, if they're feeling feisty, go 3 tight ends, a fullback, add a running back. But I say 11 personnel is definitely the way to go. And this is how I'm kicking off the game. So I wrote it down on a piece of paper. Let's see if you guys can see it. But essentially, we got 11 personnel. Obviously, Iowa runs a 4-3, so we got 4 down linemen, outside linebacker, 2 linebackers here. DB, single high safety. So first, typically when you have this formation, the running back, we're just gonna run it up the. So I'm doing this sideways. So the running back is gonna run up the gut based off the offensive lineman's block assignments. I say we're gonna change it up. We're gonna start off with an RPO just to keep it fresh. So first thing we're gonna do is take the slot receiver. We're gonna motion him across the line, and then we're gonna snap the ball as soon as he comes. Then we're gonna run this little read option here to isolate this outside linebacker here. We're not really going to run the ball. It's really just to make it freeze. And then the 2 options is either going to be the quarterback's going to run it or the slot wide receiver going to hit him on the flat, because most likely this DB out here is going to take the X and they're going to take running on the go route. So if he comes down, you have a free go route because no way the safety is going to be able to get there in time. But that's in the worst case scenario. Basically, you're going to isolate this outside linebacker, and the quarterback is going to either have a nice lane here if he goes out and defends the slot receiver, or basically have a free slot receiver right here while that linebacker tries to catch up. And trust me, that linebacker isn't catching up. It's going to be an automatic first down. And what that does is set up what we try to do for the rest of the game. Set up that inside run game. We can do that motion again, do a quick hitch, quick little toss. He takes it right open to the flat. We can run just the read option in general. We can even run that little hitch Schoonmaker, whatever we want to do. By setting that up, we're going to make them play on their toes. We're going to make them kind of feel a little weird about whatever they're going to do. It's kind of the foundation to our offense. That's the first thing we're going to do in the script. The second thing I want to see from Michigan is spread the ball out. I mean, my goodness, you have a quarterback that can run all over the field, and you're putting in bunch formations. What are you doing? So I want to see more 5 wide. Like, let's be real now. JJ McCarthy can't hit the broadside of a barn 25 yards or more. It's just the way it is. It's not a bad thing. It's just where he's at in his development. So let's make things easier. Let's go with the 5 wide formation. Bam! Right here. Then you have time to draw defensive coverages, but most likely we're going to run a 4-2-5 or some kind of nickel formation. Maybe they might even throw a dime in there, which I highly doubt because, once again, McCarthy has legs, and you give him time in the pocket, he will pick you apart. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this slot receiver right here, which will probably just be the running back, and we're going to motion him behind, and then bam, we're going to snap the ball, and we're going to throw it out quick, kind of like that halfback swing, and then our wide receivers are going to be blocking up north. And what that's going to make them do is that's going to make them come in. The DBs come in and try to play more press coverage. You all play press coverage? All right, we're going to go back to the run and shoot kind of techniques. But basically, we'll inside slant, we'll go up and out, we'll go straight, whatever you want to do. No matter what, we'll have a passing lane. This side, we'll do some things on the side to go on the outside, and bam, you're isolated. You got 4 down linemen and then 1 linebacker. We can run a quarterback draw. We can run quick routes. We can run bubble screens. Whatever we want to do. I'm going to put my money that the players that you have on your sideline are not as good as the players that I have on my sideline. And whatever we're going to do, we're going to get the ball out in space, and you will not be able to tackle us. That's kind of like the basic things I want to see from this Michigan offense this weekend. I want them to spread their formations out more. I want them to stop going for the run-dominant attack. I want them to pass the ball early. I want more RPOs, get balls in space, and hit the flat more. And then once they start coming up with the flat, that's when you hit them deep. They're not going to run a lot of 2 high safety formations because you're going to be able to run the ball anyway. We already know that about Michigan. So they're probably going to load the box, go single high safety, and that's where you're going to hit them. You got to hit them hard, you got to hit them fast, and you got to hit them in stride. McCarthy, between 16 and 25 yards, can hit guys in stride. That's where you got to attack. That's why these plays, the RPOs, the run that sets it up, and then bam, you hit them deep. So that's what I would like to see from Michigan's offense.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see exactly what ends up happening with that, because if you look at the strengths of the two teams, or the strength obviously Iowa's the defense. They have a terrific defense. It's been good in the past 5 years. They've been in the top 7 or so in almost every defensive category. I think they've been number 1 in interceptions, in the top 5 in total turnovers in the past 5 years. They're in the top 3 in yards allowed per play. So all the defensive numbers on Iowa are excellent. And part of it is because they play some somewhat moribund offenses, to be perfectly honest. But and then you look at what Michigan wants to do, as you just said. I mean, they have Blake Corum, who is, I see Ray Rice every time I look at that guy.
Absolute stud. Like I love smaller running backs because they're so versatile. They do so many things with them, and they're able to find the little gaps. And you brought up a great point about Iowa. They're a very disciplined football team. So we have to manufacture hesitation. And how do you do that? By doing exactly what I was saying. You hit them early with the RPO. You don't know where the ball's coming. You don't know where the ball's going. And the more you make them hesitate, the more you're able to get those extra yardage per play. Instead of making a 2-yard, a 3-yard game, from a 3.2 to a 4.2. And that's how you're able to consistently get first downs, consistently be able to get into the end zone. Iowa State showed us that this Iowa defense is not even remotely close to what they have been in years past. And there's a lot more talent on this Michigan team than there is on Iowa State. Don't tell me you can't put up 28, 35, 42 points of them easy if you're able to diversify your offense. Now, that's the thing that kind of makes me irritated, is that they don't at all. They just say, if we run the same thing over and over and over like we did against Ohio State last year, it's going to work. Ohio State's defense was bad last year, and that's the part nobody wants to talk about. They were awful. They're not awful anymore, and Iowa isn't awful either. So if they keep running these run plays, they're going to get exposed, and that's why I have Michigan on upset alert. But I didn't mean to interrupt you. I didn't have to go off on that tangent. You need to diversify your playbook. and get your playmakers into open space. And that's something that Michigan, if you want to do your job, you should probably, take some of these ideas and place on the field.
Okay, so we're going to take another little break, and then we're going to hit you with some maybe not quite as prominent, but still fun games that'll be coming up.
Enjoy 40% off site-wide. Vitable takes the guesswork out of feeling good. Get your own personalized daily vitamin packs safely delivered to your doorstep every month. Take their online quiz to find out which vitamins and minerals can support your personal needs based on your own diet and lifestyle. Hashtag only what you need, nothing that you don't. All vitamins are manufactured in Australia at the highest quality standard. Ingredients come in the best form for their absorption by your body. Enjoy 40% off site-wide using code NBS40 at checkout. Pickup is a fan engagement platform that aims to build communities and turn the biggest headlines in sports into free-to-play props while rewarding fans for their hot sports takes. You've likely seen their props on Nuts and Bolts Sports and some of your other favorite online publishers in leagues like USA Today, NASCAR, Flow Sports, and others. Simply make your pick on the Pickup prop and verify your pick by entering your phone number, which you will use to track your picks. Accumulate points and exchange for prizes in their marketplace. Their merch ranges from Fanatics gift cards, cross nets just in time for summer, dugout mugs, and more. Make your picks ahead of the draft now.
So, hit me with some of your favorite games for this upcoming week, Brock, and why you've picked some of those games that you're going to be checking out.
Gotcha. So I got to kick it out west. This is a game that we've talked about privately before, which is UCLA versus Washington. Now, Washington has probably been a surprise of college football, and for the most part, they've been a little bit disrespected, and they finally got their respect by being placed number 15th in the polls. But you got two teams that have phenomenal offenses and two teams that are going to be contending with USC for the Pac-12 championship. Of course, when it comes to UCLA, it's all about the 1-2 show that is Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Zach Charbonnet with a very diverse offense. They did have a scare 2 weeks ago against South Alabama. Took care of business last week. So I expect them to perform very well, but if I had to place my money, my bet is all on the Washington Huskies. Shout out to Kalen DeBoer for a phenomenal job he's done going from Fresno State up to Washington. Was supposed to bring Jake Haener with him. That didn't quite work out. Goes out to Indiana, brings in Michael Penix Jr., who has absolutely been balling since the start of the season. He has 1,388 passing yards and 12 touchdowns and 1 interception. I'm not even including his rushing stats. They have a tremendous 1-2 punch in the backfield. Virginia transfer Wayne Taulapapa, courtesy of Kahuku. He has been balling alongside Cam Davis. Another transfer for Washington State, Jalen Polk from Texas Tech. I don't think he played much there, maybe one season or so. Comes to Washington and balled out against Michigan State. 6 receptions, 153 yards, and 3 touchdowns. What can you say that hasn't been said already about the Washington Huskies? I mean, my goodness, when Chris Peterson left and Jimmy Lake took over, they were in a world of hurt. And I watched them get smoked in the Apple Cup last year. This year, they look like a completely different squad, a squad that can contend for a potential college football playoff spot. I'm thinking more a New Year's Six bowl game, but that's a game to keep an eye out to see if Washington is just on a streak of luck or are they for real. And what is UCLA up at this point? They're another undefeated team. Are they New Year's Six bound or are they just pretenders?
Okay, that's a good one. That's a fun one. Obviously, we've talked about a big Big Ten game. The ACC got touched upon as well. It should have been because the ACC has some really great games coming up. I'm going to go in a direction that some people might not expect, and this is mostly because of one player, quite frankly. I'm excited for reasons that have little to do with the outcome of the score of the game. Tennessee State, led, of course, by Eddie George, will be facing Lane, and Lane College has a player, right? They have a player that I think is one of the best players that HBCU people have been talking about it. But Andrew Farmer II of Lane College is an absolute monster. He is an absolute monster. I don't think he's gone a game so far this season without at least 1 sack. And he's had multiple tackles for loss, I believe, in every single game he's played so far. No one has had any answer for him to this point. He just cut a swath basically through all the teams he's played so far. This will be a big week for him. And, the Lane is 2-2, and, Tennessee State got off to a start that frankly was bad. And so they find themselves, mired, stuck, pick a term, sort of at the bottom of, the Ohio. Yeah, Ohio. Are they still in Ohio? Yeah, I think the Ohio Valley Conference. I know that they've been talking about maybe leaving there as well. They ended up things not working out for them quite like they'd hoped. Where they, when they left the SWAC, I don't know. I hope they would stay, and I understood the reasons why they left. And they talked about wanting to play for a national championship and things like that. But like I said, that hasn't worked out either. But in 4 games, he's come up with 18 solo tackles, 3 assisted tackles. But of those tackles, those are those are just tackles for loss, right? So he's averaging 4 solo tackles per loss per game, and with 3 assists are just sort of thrown in for flavor. That is an extraordinary number when everyone knows you're the guy you have to worry about. He's not sneaking up anyone. A total of 23. Total of 33 tackles. So 33 total tackles. But of those 33 tackles, almost half of them are tackles for loss. That's the kind of incredibly disruptive presence that he has been so far this season. So I'll be paying attention to that game basically for one player. I'm not afraid to admit it. Hitting on a couple of their HBCU games where there's a little more on the line in terms of the outcome. And, of course, if you have ESPN Plus, you can check these games out. So Miles College versus Albany State, that is on ESPN Plus, as is Benedict versus Fort Valley. Now, this isn't just about one player. These are 2 undefeated teams. Both of them are 3-0. Benedict going into Fort Valley. And they both have some good players. I think that that's going to be a game that's going to be very, very close. I hate to come back to saying things that you've been hearing since you were, whenever you started playing football, but which team tackles better? Which team blocks better? It sounds terrible to say because it's so boring, so cliche, but that's what's going to be. There's not a huge difference in talent. There's not a huge difference in a lot of – those are 2 teams that are sort of mirror images to some extent of each other. So execution is going to decide that game. There's not some big difference in speed and size, any of that. And then there's one sort of special Sunday game, which you don't see very often in college football. But the Thoroughbreds of Kentucky State will play Savannah State. And Savannah State, as some people might remember, of course, is the alma mater of one Shannon Sharp, NFL Hall of Famer. They don't have any Shannon Sharps on this squad. I've looked, but they have some good players. And it's a special night. It's both alumni night and also a fundraiser for breast cancer awareness. So if you are in the Savannah, Georgia area, and you want to see a good football game and also support a great cause, check that game out. What are some other sort of more under the radar games that you're going to have locked in for you?
Well, first, just talking about HBCUs in general. If you want to look for a game that just really breaks your heart, watch Grambling football. My goodness. Hugh Jackson, what are you doing? I understand you don't have the collection of talent that, Grambling has had in the past, but somebody get that man out of that job. So I just had to just... Yeah, I saw TikTok yesterday about him walking off the bus. I'm so excited. I'm more excited for these players. You're 1-3. Try to hire Art Briles as an OC. What are you doing, my man? But
they hired the wrong former Bengals coach. The guy they should have gone after was Marvin Lewis, quite frankly. But that's, once again, as you like to say, a story for another day. But I really think they made a bit of a mistake. Well, not a bit of a mistake. Why am I saying a bit? They made a huge mistake. And they're paying for it.
Yeah, they are. And the Hugh Jackson experience just continues to ravage through, young men's lives. But other games I'm looking forward to. Tulane versus Houston. Now, Houston is a team that really has disappointed this season. Honestly, they had that overtime win against UTSA, then they had a couple really bad losses. Tulane is kind of a surprising team. They have a very, very good offense. Well, a quarterback that makes you go, whoa, hold up, wait a minute. Tulane has something there.
Ask Oklahoma about Michael Pratt, yeah.
When I see him last year against Spencer Rattler, and the guys was like, oh, who is this guy? They had to move because of the hurricane, and they're playing in Oklahoma, and they just came on ball. It was impressive. He's definitely taking a step up. So that's a game to watch. You take about potential under the radar pro prospects. We've already talked about Clayton Tune and Nathaniel Dell enough already. But again, those guys I really like. UNLV, my alma mater, watch out for them. They have been absolutely cooking. Only one loss on the season. They just went up to Logan, Utah and smoked Utah State.
Yes.
Doug Brumfield has been balling. They have a really nice collection of offensive talents and wide receivers. And right now, I believe they're 3-1, first place in their division in the Mountain West. And that's a Mountain West that is fairly weak this year. Could they be a championship team? Only time will tell. But that's another game I'm looking forward to. Last one I got a hit on. I know we'll talk about this a little bit, but Arkansas, Alabama. Now, this is a very interesting game because Arkansas played them tough last year, but Alabama was able to win. They just had that really devastating loss last week against Texas A&M. I'm sure they're going to come up firing. For Alabama, they're a team where we don't really know where they are. Now, we think they're national contenders. I believe they're national contenders. I put money on them winning the national championship. But at the same time, they have that scare against Texas. They have looked mundane at times. There's not really that star offensive threat outside of Bryce Young that we're used to. You know, back then, you could name off 4 or 5 names easy. Can we really do that anymore? I can't say so. So this, to me, is a good test to see where is Alabama at nationally and how close is Arkansas from being a national championship contender.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in another sort of, I won't say it's off the radar. It's a game that so many people I think are aware of, but it's a game that I guess its immediate future is in doubt, which upsets you a little bit because it's such a tremendous rivalry that I think some people aren't that aware of. But in the wagon wheel game, BYU will face Utah State, and it's a game that's been played since it's been played since before that, but it's been a trophy game. It's been one of those games where you have a trophy that changes hands since 1948. They played what's called the old wagon wheel, which is 4 feet high, big old wooden wheels, which symbolizes the Mormon pioneers who are, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints pioneers that headed west to Utah in the mid-1800s. And Jaron Hall, of course, is out there doing the thing. He's averaging 291 yards passing per game, 9 touchdowns, 1 interception, 71.5% completion rate. He's very much grown on me. Like when I first saw him, I was like, oh, okay, but he's growing on me. I'm starting to see some things there. And of course, the first black quarterback in BYU's history. So he's broken down some real barriers there. BYU went through a period. I mean, I don't have time to get into the story of the Wyoming 14, but there was a very famous protest against BYU because they had at one point, some odd racial practices. I'll leave it at that. But moving forward, they've fought through some things there. Now, this rivalry is in danger because BYU is leaving, or not leaving. I mean, they're independent, but they're going to be joining the Big 12. And right now, they would be, Utah State's man clearly want to keep playing the game. But with the 9-game Big 12 schedule, there's a lot of constraints on BYU's non-conference scheduling. So at the moment, they're not scheduled to play this game again next year. I hope that changes. But as I mentioned, there's some very good players on both teams, but BYU particularly has, as always, has dudes. They have some good receivers. They always have good tight ends. Their offensive line is maybe not the best, but it's good. And they're going to have to try for Utah State to win this game, which is, admittedly unlikely. What they're going to have to do, amongst the things they're going to have to do, is they're going to have to find a way to contain Jaron Hall, who is, once again, like most good quarterbacks nowadays, a dual threat. He can make plays in the pocket. He can make plays outside the pocket. He can just take off and hurt you with his feet. He's got more speed at receiver than they've had at BYU maybe ever. And I've been watching BYU since the 70s. So I can't remember them having so many guys that look like they run 4.5 or under. I'll put it that way. And this is me just sort of, estimating based on watching those guys. But they're going to, look to run, and then boom, deep shots. Utah State, actually won the Mountain West last year, though you wouldn't know it to look at them this year. They averaged 33 points a game last year. That's dropped down to a miserable 15 points this year. Logan Bonner was amazing last year, 36, passing touchdowns. He had 8.6 yards per attempt, which far and away led the conference. Now he's got 8 interceptions, 6 touchdowns this year. His yards per pass attempts reversed from 8.6 to 6.8. The BYU defense bounced back last week after Oregon kind of embarrassed them. They held run first Wyoming to just 22 yards in the first half. Keenan Pili, who I'm sure you're aware of, missed almost all. I think he missed all of maybe 2 games. I think in 2021. Came back and looked good. Micah Harper looked good, who also had an ACL or had an injury that caused him to miss all of the previous season. And then the committee approach, at certain positions or hot hand or whatever, can work at some positions. I'm sometimes critical of it. I like people sort of letting guys settle in and get a lather up and all that kind of stuff, but they're making it work in their backfield and other places with, multiple people getting lots of touches. But that all, as you like to say, with that being said, I don't think this game will be terribly close or terribly interesting, unfortunately. I think it's at least a 2, but more like a 3-score game. I think Utah State may rise up and fight hard for a little while because it's their last chance to play this team for a while. But they just don't have enough, there's not enough horses and not enough hay in their barn to hang with them. Do you have any other games you wanted to sort of hit on?
No, we kind of hit everything already. But on that game, Clark Barrington, offensive lineman for BYU, is a guy that I'm really falling in love with. To me, he could be a day 3 undrafted free agent that becomes a solid NFL vet. So that's just another guy to keep an eye on. He's a junior right now. I think he's probably going to come back for a senior year, most likely. So he won't be draft eligible for another year or so. But that's just another name to keep an eye on. But no, we kind of hit everything. BYU, obviously they've kind of given up any of their ties to former rivalries in order to try and join bigger conferences. I don't know how well it's going to work out for them personally. To me, recruiting is still going to be at the same level, and they're just going to enter a place that is higher competition. They did beat Baylor this year, but that's just one team. I don't know how that's going to work out for them, but I guess time will tell. I'm just looking forward to another great weekend of college football. That's all I got to say.
I once again, I could not agree more with that. This is going to be really like a separation Saturday. Like we're going to really finally get a sense of who's good. Yeah. And we'll have so much fun the next week talking about what we were right about, what we were wrong about. So another very important message, people.
The Team Nuts and Bolts Sports Store is officially open. Log on to www.teamnbsmerch.com and get your t-shirts, hoodies, polos, all sizes available. Once again, log on to teamnbsmerch.com. Get yours today. All 22 is the future of scouting databases. With over 20,000 players, All 22 allows you to be the GM. All 22, the Global Scouting Network.
And so once again, I want to thank everybody, but especially Jeffrey Fan, who will be back again in a few weeks, hopefully, to break down, once again, the ACC, where he is one of the best of the best. On behalf of Brock Vieira, on behalf of Bill Carroll, and obviously on behalf of Nuts and Bolts Sports, thank you so much for your time and attention, everyone. We will see you again in 1 week.